Hello there, and welcome to my cake kitchen. My name is Gladys, and over here I make simple, informative tutorials to help you navigate cake decorating easily. I also create baking tutorials live where we bake through a session from start to finish, talking you through ingredient selection, the intention behind selecting such ingredients, how they affect what our objective is, and hopefully at the end of the bake we see our results live. Most of the time in recent times we've had great bakes and we're packed with several tips for you. So if it's your first time here, hello and thanks for joining me on today's bake session. If you've already been here and you are a friend or subscriber to the channel, great to have you back. It's always a pleasure when these moments happen, and I hope today's video will be of some value to you. In recent times, we've started a session where you pick a recipe and I bake it. That is progressing, but in today's video, we are simply undertaking a bake. I have a series of cakes to go out for customers, so I thought I'll bring you along. We're going to bake the cakes. Hopefully, we have time to look at the end products of what we bake. We're going to be making a red velvet cake and a vanilla cake. Both recipes are on the channel already. I have completed those recipes on live tutorials, and I also have a long form edited version on the homepage channel page. So check all of those out. But where necessary, I will stop to talk you through the ingredient selection for each cake and the intentions surrounding it. Hopefully that will bring you some more value and some more information. And whilst we're at it, probably when the cake goes in, I will also be talking to you about my baking journey and baking career, what I feel about it, how the transition to YouTube happened, just so that if you're in such a spot and you're unsure what to do, or you don't know what to expect, I can give you some sort of insight and guidance. Hopefully that will be of some help to you. So without having to waste your time, what we're going to do is we're going to start with, perhaps, I'm trying to think, let's start with the vanilla cake to start with, because that is a little less messy. Because I'm thinking to myself, if we started with the red velvet, I'll have too much color. And just so you know, by the time we finish this, if I can transition seamlessly without any breaks here, then I'll probably do that, wash this up, come back. But if that seems very unlikely, I'm going to transition quickly to the other mixer, just so that we have a seamless transition there. But I can see a couple of you in the chats out there. Hello there, good morning. Well, it's not morning, it's I think it's after lunch in the UK. My morning has been pretty busy, so time has flown very quickly. So if you're in the chat there, hello, 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 hello. A pleasure to have you back. If you're still in the chat, leave us a hello, a thumbs up in the chat, and then when I'm done with some aspects of the task, I can come back and talk to you. But just giving you a quick heads up that if you're in the chat and you're trying to engage with me or draw my attention, I'm not going to be able to do that because I am a one-person channel and a one-person production. I create all of this myself, set myself up, so I'm not unable to get assistance to manage both. But we have some great people, Delaney and Amanda, who sometimes moderate the channel. So if they're in the chat, hello to them, and they will keep you happy and engaged here. And if you're watching this back on replay, it's a pleasure to have you. If you're a baker, hopefully this recipe here will give you some value. But for the ingredients I'm going to be using, I'm using some margarine and granulated sugar. I have said granulated sugar, caster sugar can be swapped interchangeably for certain recipes. You just have to understand how they impact your bake. Not so much the sugar, because one would give you a very fine crumb, whereas the granulated sugar tends to give you a little bit of a coarse crumb, but that is if you're very, very particular about how your crumb presents. And I'm also going to be using the creamy method to do that. And the creamy method is generally when the sugar and margarine are mixed, blended, creamed, beaten together. It all means the same thing. Essentially, the basics of it is that the sugar crystals dig into the margarine, which is the fat, and create air pockets. These air pockets, combined with the technique we use and ingredients, eventually when it ends in the bake oven, helps to keep the cake risen and also helps to form the structure of the cake. This is almost like a simplified version of the science of creaming butter and sugar together. But with that also in mind, this recipe here is very adaptable. It's my own recipe that I made, so it is, you can adapt it. You can swap portions of the granulated sugar for caster sugar, brown sugar. It all depends on what the outcome of your objectives are for the bake. So I'll leave all the links to the original recipes in the description box when we're done here, and hopefully that should be of some use to you. Over here we don't tend to measure our vanilla a lot, so I've just put some vanilla here, but I'll leave the exact descriptions in exact quantities in the description box. So we're going to cream this for about 4 to 5 minutes, when not only will the volume of the quantity here increase, but it will also change color. The yellow looking margarine here will change color to a pale looking, softer textured mixture. And that's what we're going to do. Whilst we're at it, I am going to mix the eggs here together a little bit, just so that it makes it easier. I've done that. Now we've creamed this slightly, and as I said earlier, you'll find that the mixture changes color and increases in volume, and the more you cream it, it just occurred to me that okay, let's have this. Okay. At this stage, you want to be careful not to overbeat or cream your sugar and butter, because if you do that and you break the structure of the butter, you will have difficulty with your cake being stable or having a steady structure to it. So over here, you almost have to look out for some cues that the butter, when it is beaten with the sugar, has changed consistency, color, and increased in volume, but it has some sturdiness to it, and I will show you that in a moment. So as I was saying, if you are creaming the sugar and butter or margarine, you want to be able to make sure that you don't overbeat it. But what does that look like, right? For me, it's a cue where you can pick up a quantity of the contents in the mixer, and then on a spatula, if I shook the spatula slightly, I shouldn't do it vigorously. At this point, I kind of feel like I need to cream it a bit more, but I've done this enough, which is why I give you the time guidance, right? On a cold weather day, on a regular day where it's not too hot, it's not cold, yeah, about 4 to 5 minutes. On a cold weather day, it can go up to 9 minutes, because even at room temperature, sometimes your environment will affect the structure of your batter and what it looks like. So on a cold weather day, I'll put the batter in the microwave quickly so that it is soft. Where the softness is that you can dip your finger into it, make an impression without too much pressure, right? I think that is about the base recommendation, but I like to get my butter a little bit softer than that. Not so soft that you have like an oil film on the surface of the butter or margarine, or it is runny, but soft enough that I do not have to even do much about the pressure at all. I have discussed this in detail in my vanilla cake recipe, so you might just want to check that. And I tend to have the same guidance for my cake and buttercream recipes, especially for the consistency and appearance of the butter or margarine. So the time guidance today in England is not that warm, but it's not cold. We've had a warm day, a few warm days the last few days last week. On that day, I probably will cream it up to about 4 minutes, because then your environment is hot, and the more you cream, the butter or margarine can melt rather quickly. But say if I was doing this in the winter, I have gone up to 9 minutes, and that is fine. I just have to make sure that the visual cues are on point and guides me to the objective I am aiming for. And I hope that is of some use to you. Now, with that part of the creaming done, let's have a look again and see what we are looking at in terms of. Yep. Is it 4 to 5 minutes yet? I almost feel like I have to cream this a bit more. But then again, margarine has a lighter texture to butter, so this should be okay. The mixer I'm using here is the Kenwood K Mix. I bought this myself, but it's a good mixer. It is not as affordable as I would have you think, because it's about £200, which in dollars might be a bit more, but it is an entry-level sort of mixer that does the job, and is pretty reliable. I have created a whole tutorial on a review on it, so you might want to check that out, and I'll leave information in the description box for you. Now our cream mixture has reached where I want it to be, so it's about time I add the eggs. I'm going to add the eggs in a bit at a time over here, and right, the eggs have gone in, but what I'm going to do is I am going to stir the sides all in and leave this to beat. Yeah, because we need the eggs to incorporate into the butter and sugar mixture here. So that is what we're going to do. And whilst we're at it, there is quite a few of you in the chat. Just like the video, and if you haven't joined the community here, do consider joining the community, because we're a supportive bunch here. And whilst the videos are baking centered with a focus on baking, we interact about all sorts. In recent times, I think some of our friends, there was Dolly who had a shop opening last week, a market stall, I think an indoor market stall. Dolly, if you're in the chat, how did that go? This might be random, but how did that go? We have Delaney. Delaney has had a really tough day yesterday. She was talking to me on the community post. You know, we are an engaged bunch here, so join us and feel the love we have over here, and hopefully you find some value in the baking we bring to you. So our eggs have gone in, and the eggs have been mixed into the cream mixture. At this point, the moisture in the eggs also helps to kind of reduce the sugar crystals and melt them down a little bit. So I think it's time we added our flour. But before we add the flour, it is just regular self-raising flour, and we have some buttermilk. The acid in buttermilk helps to give the cake a little bit of a tangy taste and brings a complex taste profile to it. I also have some salt in the flour, and the mixer has a fold function, so I can slow the mixer down and complete the adding of the flour in a slow pace without over mixing it. So that is one advantage of the mixer over here. And just before the flour is all mixed in together, I am going to if you're iffy about bakers using their hands, I'm going to tell you now to look away, because I am going to employ the use of my hands to put this batter in the mixer. Yeah, but you did see me wash my hands, right? So because the internet loves to educate you on things that really doesn't need education on, because I have seen bakers being bullied into using gloves, and I'm like, gloves are not always your solution at all. So I am going to mix this together. I am just using the spatula to help things along. And then I will finish it off with the paddle attachment. Oh, in the meantime, the mixer is, I'm going to turn the mixer back on just to kind of finish the mix homogeneously. We're doing that for maybe 20 seconds. So let's count 20, 19, 18, 16. Oh, wow. I went from, okay, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're done. Okay? We're done. Right? So there you go. And I am going to clear the rest of the batter here. And we are going to distribute the batter in a tin. Yeah, this is going to be baked in a 7-inch tin. Yep, we've got that all sorted. Wow, our batter is out now, so I'm going to mix that in slightly, and then it goes straight into our pan. I have a 7-inch tin here. Right. So our cake is in a 7-inch tin. I have just stamped that on the work surface just to pop out some air bubbles. And what I have done is I have evened out the surface a little bit to give it an even rise and an even bake over here. Now with that done, we are going to bake this in the oven at 170 degrees C for any time between 55 minutes to an hour, 15 minutes. But one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some water in the oven to serve as a cooling mechanism to cool the oven whilst the cake is baking, and that will go in the base of the oven. And then with that, our cake goes in the oven and it is exactly 12:57. So almost 1 o'clock. So hopefully this should be done for 2 o'clock, really. So welcome back. If you're still in the chat with us, thank you for being here. But we're going to start the red velvet cake, the recipe. Now, because the oven is already in use, we're going to make the batter, which we can leave to the side. And then when our cake gets done, we can put the red velvet cake in. I could have perhaps waited with the first batch of the butter and then created the red velvet, but the tins for the red velvet come in as 5-inch tins. You will find that sometimes the variation in sizes and quantity of butter can be affected when you bake. Plus, I chose to bake the 7-inch vanilla cake in as a deep tin, so it will need a longer bake time as compared to the 5-inch tins here. So I'm just going to undertake this bake as a separate bake there. And like I said earlier, this recipe is on the channel long form video version, so you can check that out. And I have adapted it to a very flavorful cake recipe as well, which is in the live sessions. I undertook that a little while ago. It is a very adaptable recipe that you can swap ingredients around. I'm using full-on margarine and caster sugar here, but you can swap parts of the margarine for oil, which is vegetable oil, and swap the sugar for parts of brown sugar or light brown sugar to give you a coarser, tighter crumb, but also with a bit of flavor. This is my own recipe, so yeah, the recommendations on the video description page should be of some use to you, right? So the margarine and sugar is gone in there, and I'm going to add some vanilla here. Over here, our vanilla, we don't measure it, so, but I'll leave exact quantities and in the description box here, right? So we're going to cream this for another 5 to 6 minutes altogether. And whilst we're doing that, if you're in the chat, leave us a hello and let us know where you are coming from. And if you're joining us on replay here, thank you for your time, and it's lovely to have you on the channel. If you haven't noticed yet, I love cakes. But when we're done with the red velvet cake, I'm probably going to tell you a bit about my story, how I got into cake making, how I transitioned to being a baker with a YouTube channel, what the experience is like, and perhaps what you can do differently. So I hope you can stay in there so it is of some value to you. Just in case you just started, you don't know what you're doing when it comes to YouTube, maybe I can give you a bit of insight. I don't suppose I know everything about YouTube. I am still learning a ton every day, but it is my hope that I can share my experience with you as honestly as possible, just so that you have some sort of relatable insight to what to expect in the business of baking and also the business of content creation as well. Okay, look, I've been on YouTube a long time, for 4 years now, and yeah, it's been such a journey. So it is just my hope that we can hit 5K by the end of the month, and we are nearly there. I think at the moment we are counting a little over 4.5K. So what are you doing? Join us and be notified. So if you do consider subscribing, hit the notification bell also, so that you're notified of future videos such as live baking tutorials, long form content. I create vlogs of my experiences on busy baking days, or the life of a baker in general. You will have a peek into sometimes my own online diary of a certain day that I'm struggling with cakes. My channel is very unfiltered. in that it is my goal and objective to bring you a realistic experience of what the business of baking looks like, what baking is, and also the life of a baker. So you won't be short over here at all, and we have daily shorts. If you can't be, if you can't invest time in the long form content, that's okay. Join us on the daily short, leave a like and comment with us. And if none of that catches your fancy, check the community page. Our community page is very, very interactive. So join us here. It will be a pleasure to have you on the team. Okay. In the meantime, our butter, and I keep saying butter, it's margarine. Our fat and sugar has creamed enough. I did talk a bit about the creaming method in the earlier session when we were making the vanilla cake, but we've got that to a consistency that we can work with at the moment. So I'm going to let that go for another minute or two, and then we can consider adding our eggs now. The eggs are beaten now. We have some buttermilk here too, and we have some food coloring here. I am going to be using the Sugar Flare extra red here for the coloring. The good thing about this recipe is that you can omit certain ingredients and you will still get a great bake. For instance, if I was making this for, say, somebody who had a specific dietary or specific food preference, or for religious reasons has to exclude certain ingredients, for instance, white wine vinegar, I'll exclude that if I was making that for a halal preference here. Now I'm going to add the egg here. Because I had already beaten the eggs and the eggs were already at room temperature, notice that I didn't do anything with the eggs at all, and actually it's gone on to mix rather quickly in the bake over there. Now our eggs have mixed in slightly. We're looking for a visual cue here. The cue here is that we should make sure that the mixture is not broken. It is looking slightly broken and curdled, but it will come together eventually. The idea is to keep mixing, and sometimes bakers have recommended that you add a little bit of flour here. I wouldn't. It will come together by itself, and if it doesn't, if you add the flour, it should be okay. Right, now we are going to add our flour that has a pinch of salt and some cocoa powder. Now a little bit of that goes in the mixture. I've slowed the mixer down to the fold function, which should help us mix this slightly. And this is the time that I tend to add my coloring. The coloring here is a paste, so it mixes in okay. See, it's changing color, and I'm going to add my buttermilk all in one go, and the rest of the flour is going in too. Now just before that finishes, I'm just going to help the process along by scraping the sides in, so that the mixer doesn't have to. But then again, the mixer I'm using here is a good one. If you slow it down using the fold function, it will do the job without you having to mix it manually by hand. But I guess I am just being overly cautious here. There you go. I've added the white wine vinegar here. A tablespoonful is what you need, but I left the tablespoonful there. But I will leave the exact ingredient quantities in the description box for you. We have our red velvet cake batter. Now, I know there is a school of thought that believes that red velvet cake is perhaps a chocolate cake that has some color thrown into it. That would be fair. That is too far from what a red velvet cake recipe is. A red velvet cake is actually a really good cake to eat, but I also think, a very controversial opinion here, as a baker, red velvet is quite overrated. The way non-bakers and customers fuss over a red velvet cake is nothing like other cakes that are flavorful, that are great tasting, that you can enjoy. But for some reason, red velvet just seems to be this thing that everyone kind of feels like it's the cake to have. But I guess my perspective is influenced by the fact that I am a baker. So I think red velvet cakes are overrated. There are great cakes that one can have that are great tasting, flavorful, but I guess what the customers don't know, they don't know. So I'm not having a go, I'm just expressing my thoughts about a red velvet cake, which I think is overrated. But overrated or not, the batter is done. And here is what it looks like. It is all homogeneously mixed together. And we're going to split that between two 5-inch pans. You could measure these up, but I can eyeball this rather easily. So you want to make sure you don't overfill the pan. And these pans are the PME anodized tins. These are 5-inch baking at 4-inch deep. So these are deep pans, and the recipe is optimized for a deeper bake like this, and then I will level after. So I want to make sure that I don't overfill the pans so it becomes a problem for when it rises from the oven. So I'm just going to take some of the batter out so that it bakes all the way in that way. Hopefully that helps. So that's our batter done. And whilst we're at it, I'm going to move the batter this way. Our vanilla cake has been in for about 28 minutes now. Our red velvet cake is done now, but it's not going to be in the oven yet. We have another cake baking, which is the vanilla cake. So we're going to keep the red velvet out here until the vanilla cake finishes baking. The vanilla cake, we've tried and tested the same recipe over and over again. And whilst my aim is to give you a great experience of the baking session when we're on these lives, because we don't pre-bake, I don't pre-bake my cakes at all. I could, to manage time, I could bake a cake, and then at this point in time, whilst we're baking this one, I can introduce what we have already baked pre-session into the session to manage time and to mitigate expectations also. But you see, the thing on this channel that I try to bring is that I want you to be able to see into the results of what we have done, so you're part of the experience, and also you're part of seeing what has been done, because much of baking also has to do with not just ingredients and recipes. It has more to do with technique and specific information, because baking is a science. If I told you to make a cake and I give you the ingredients listing and told you cream the batter, what does creaming look like? What are the visual cues in terms of appearance, change of texture that you have to observe to lead you to the next stage? Because it's a consistent process where you go from one phase to the other, and you have to be very informed and adept with what you're observing or achieving at every stage before you get to the bake. So it's always been my goal that as best as possible, I can introduce you to the session. We give you all the information and then we undertake the bake so you are a part of it, which is why I don't pre-bake a cake before the start of the session. However, these recipes are quite familiar over here. I have made recent videos on the vanilla cake recipes where I tested them and retested and adapted some of them using different flour options. All of them are on the live feed. I've baked 80 cupcakes on, I think, on camera, and I frosted them whilst we're still here. So you know what? Our vanilla cake is baking. I say all that to say our vanilla cake is baking and the red velvet is waiting. So my story about how I became a baker. I could tell you that story for a lifetime. How much time do we have in a day? But I'm going to give you like the summary version. Hopefully at a better time when we sit down properly, I can have a conversation about how I became a baker. Well, I bake now and I have a baking business where I take custom orders, create custom cakes, wedding cakes, celebration cakes, cakes of all sorts, right? I do that now as a business. However, that was not always my life. I don't have the story of my nana used to bake and my mom used to bake and we baked in the kitchen. No. If you haven't noticed, I live in England now. I've lived in the UK for the last 17 years. But I am Ghanaian. I come from Ghana. It's a West Africa. Delaney. Hi, darling. Hi, how are you over there? Delaney, I just see you over there. I'll come back and talk to you in a moment. I couldn't help myself, but I was in the middle of talking about how I became a baker. But I hope you are having a good day. And if you're just joining us on replay, hello there. Now let's go back to talking about how I became a baker, right? So I don't have the sort of novice story of my mom was a baker, my granny was a baker, and as a Ghanaian or a girl who grew up in an African home, I guess I was always destined to know my way around a kitchen. It's a thing, it's a cultural thing. I had to censor myself because there was something I wanted to say that. Okay, so growing up in an African home, I was always destined to know my way around a kitchen because as an African girl, it was almost expected of you to learn how to cook. Now, there are so many ways we can look at that, but essentially, I guess cooking is such an underrated skill. I mean, in certain cultures, it is almost like designated as a gender-based, as in a female-based activity. For most, in some cultures where you have to go and cook because you're the woman. Now I'm getting into controversial territory, but I'm just telling you about my cultural experience growing up many years ago back in Ghana. However, I guess cooking has become such like a recognized skill where people that grow their careers to become chefs in all sorts. So looking back, I think it was a good thing that my mom empowered me to know my way around the kitchen. But baking wasn't one of those. More so, I was limited in the equipment and gadget that would support like a great bake for me because today I have access to a hob and an oven and a cooker and all of that. But back where I grew up in Ghana, having these things are sort of a luxury, and I'll leave it as that. So baking wasn't my thing at all, and I went to school. I was blessed to be academically adept. So yeah, I focused on going to school and achieving success over there and doing everything that was related to school, and then hoping that I would perhaps become something else far from the baker I am today. Well, fast forward life just life in, and I came to the UK. And the last 17 years I have lived in the UK, I had a full-time job. I worked in various places in social care, healthcare, and I provided care for clients in many aspects of the industry. And that would span over a decade of committed work. I worked at least 10 to 12 hours days, but when you make a living out of a career or a job, I guess sometimes you don't stop to think about what options are there. And I have almost learned to utilize the opportunities that are ahead of me. The path to healthcare wasn't connected to my educational background back in Ghana before I came to the UK. But nonetheless, it was a path that I embraced and sought to develop myself and gain some great results from it. So yes, I probably, if I had pursued that, maybe I would have become a nurse specializing in something. I don't know. But anyway, that happened. But I think what led me into baking wasn't even a planned thing. In my job over the years, there were some developments in my life that became rather chaotic and difficult to manage. So this would eventually affect my ability to sort of keep giving my myself up in the field I was as a worker, as in a full-time worker. So because of that limitation, I sought to think quickly ahead of myself and see what avenues. I don't suppose I sat there and thought to myself, oh, I want a whole change of career. Because what would that have looked like? Because sometimes the natural thing is that you fall into a job and you get good at it. It becomes a case of mastery where you spend your 10,000 hours developing this particular skill in this place, that you almost don't have a sense of anything else outside of what you have. But the question is that what you have, how is that going to change, or how can you fit it into other circumstances in terms of career path if this particular thing you're doing here is so fine and so niche for you? You see what I mean? I don't know if I'm making sense over here, but I'm just saying, because I worked in social care, healthcare, and all the job opportunities that will lead to career advancement stayed in that pool. If I left that, I don't know if I would have functioned behind a 9 to 5 computer like center job. Say if I had an office job, I don't know what that would look like. Just before I left like full-time employment, I did have like my position in an office base, and I struggled. I couldn't manage. Like I would go and I would be bored out of my brain, and I just wanted to go back to being on the road and doing things actively that was like customer facing, that was client centered. And sitting behind a computer wasn't my thing. But it's ironic that I say that now, because part of being on YouTube means that I spend a lot of time behind the computer. But I digress. I say that to say the circumstances in my life at the time gave me an inkling to open my options to what may be ahead of me for the future. At the time, I was working in a very unique set or environment within which the client that I was working with enjoyed cooking. So it was just our shared love of cooking that extended to occasional baking. So we cooked, we both enjoyed the activity. The client was very home centered. So we did all of these things, and then we'll share these meals we cooked with family, and we hosted family, and we did some great stuff that I still have very, 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 very memorable moments from. And an extension of those cooking practices, which is an activity that we both engaged in, which is for me to encourage the particular client to see themselves do something that they enjoyed, and my job was to encourage them to achieve those goals, led to a sense of fulfillment for me in that activity. And an extension of that activity will then become what? Baking. So I remember the very first cake we baked, we had no measuring tools, we had no gadgets, we just had a bowl and a lot of ambition to undertake a bake randomly by pouring in ingredients that were not measured, but hope that a miracle would happen and we'll make a cake. It is funny to think that such ambition mindlessly would lead me here today. Such a story that just looks like, how could you have done that, and what was the result of that bake? I'll tell you that in a moment. But by so doing, the joy of the experiments led us to making a butter cake, a butter bundt cake. I remember that cake very much. Just picture a bundt cake, a bundt butter cake. That was the cake we made. We melted, because we didn't have the mixing or mixer. We decided to make the cake from using a melting the butter instead of beating it, because when we melted the butter, then it means we can add it into liquid ingredients and then pour the liquid ingredients into the dry ingredients and mix it together. So it's not what we did today. It's a completely different technique that still yields great bake, and miraculously our bake turned out great. We didn't have a mixer or anything, but it turned out great. And I think I have a snapshot of how excited we both were at undertaking the project, even though we knew our limitations. And when we took the cake out of the bundt pan and it was all formed and it was light, it was flavorful, I was like, yes, this is amazing. And then that was it. So I remember that the joy we felt, it was no more different from the joy we felt undertaking our general cooking activities, such as food, right? The general foods that we cooked. But the joy of making that cake from a place of such unknown and adventure was so exciting. And I just thought, oh, this is a great thing. So for me, I remember leaving work and going home and then shopping for my first ingredients. And the intention was to try new recipes using the basic techniques we had, so that I could introduce these things as activities with the client. So my journey of baking started not because I wanted to make cakes as a business or anything. It was simply because I wanted to develop recipes that were easy to make, that would give us great outcomes. And if I could forbear those moments of the process, then if I introduced it on an activity day with this client, we would be looking forward to some good results, so we are not disappointed. I think that real raw and passionate intention to support the client would eventually start this passionate thing about cakes, because then week after week thereafter, I found myself in the kitchen developing cake recipes. And in fact, it wasn't cakes I was developing for. I was developing for cupcakes, because one of those cakes we made, we shared the cake with the client's family members, and one of their family member said to me, oh, this is a good cake. And that family member was a baker themselves, so they baked professionally and had undertaken baking as a business, but they gave it up at some point. So as a result of that intention and insight, their word meant a lot to me, and their encouragement actually sparked something that made me feel like, okay, maybe this is good, you know. So I didn't get it in over my head, and I wasn't delusional. This person was my boss technically, so they had no intention to sell me dreams or tell me anything that was further from what is true. So they just the sheer comment of, oh, this is really good, was an encouragement. So I think the first thing you want to take is objective opinion, right? Objective opinion can be positive, it can equally be negative, right? So I had an objective opinion here, which is that they weren't like trying to impress me. They had no reason to tell me anything other than the fact that the cake was good. And I took that on face value, but I didn't get it into my head that yes, suddenly I was a great baker and I was going to go around the world and I was going to win all the cakes I am going to be making. So I will be telling you what happened thereafter. But before we continue the story, let's get in the chat. If you've just joined us, hello and welcome. So let's come back to the story of a client's family member complimenting a bake we completed. It kind of just made me think, oh, okay, this actually excites me. The process of going through a recipe and putting ingredients together that doesn't look like anything by themselves was actually an exciting project for me, especially more so because I would take that and then go back to the client and they will bake and it was fun. So yes, their family member gave me the compliment, and then after that I thought I will do this a bit more. So initially when I started baking, I baked cupcakes, and the more cupcakes I made, the more it interested me to experiment and see what my best results will be. I've always been interested in understanding at least the mechanics and science of the baking process. Now, that is not to say I wanted to be a scientist. There are people who can do that and do that well. But I came to understand very earlier on that having an understanding of the baking process and the science of it will help you troubleshoot and fix baking problems. Because if you haven't had baking problems, I'm telling you, it's going to happen. It will happen at some point in your career. Well, a large cake hasn't fallen on you, or a particular bake hasn't, like, you've tried baking it 5 times and it's still like not happening. You're like, what is happening? Well, there was the time where I baked a whole cake. I baked 70 cupcakes. So that was almost 3 batches of cupcakes. And guess what? I kept putting the wrong flour in. And I didn't realize, because the flour pot I was using, I have a gray pot, the pots are the same, the lids are different. There's a gray one for self-raising flour, and there's a white one for self-raising flour, and there's a gray one for plain flour. Except I had accidentally swapped the tops, putting the gray one for self-raising and white for plain. And this recipe, cupcake recipe, required a large portion of plain flour. And guess what I was doing? I kept pouring the self-raising flour because it had the gray top, thinking I was using plain flour. And after 2 batches, a batch of 30, and so later 70, a batch of 30 each, so 2 batches later I had to take the entire cupcakes in the bin, only to realize what is happening here. So I ended up putting some of the flour in water and realized that I was using the wrong flour. Had I not had a sense of the science of baking in trying to fix the problem, I would be saying my recipe is wrong, or I'd be totally focused on the wrong way to fix the problem. So I learned earlier on that having an understanding of the baking process was very, very key to success in baking, however else you undertook it. So when I started baking cupcakes, I also, being Ghanaian, didn't have such a sweet tooth. Now, there are people who can binge on sweet things, from ice cream to cupcakes and to any cakes, without a problem. Not specifically for health concern or anything. That's not my immediate or primary thought process. It was more like there are people who just can eat sweets. I know people in my life who just can enjoy a sweet, like you give them a box of sweets and they can munch the whole box down and top it up with cakes and finish it off with soda or fizzy drinks and still be okay. I find that overwhelming. Something too sweet is overwhelming. That probably comes from my Ghanaian upbringing, where as a child you can't spend your lunch money on sweets, and chocolate is a luxury. So I didn't grow up with a sense of overwhelming sweetness. And then I fell into this cupcake thing, and I'll make the cakes because before I would adapt a recipe, I have to find a base recipe. So a generalized cake recipe that was online, and then I would bake that and observe what I didn't like about it, and then begin to redevelop that recipe. And I realized very quickly that most of the recipes I picked online were just too sweet for me, right? So I was like, what can I do? And then I began to readapt my recipes for a palate that wasn't overwhelmingly too sugary. Now, when I say the cakes are less sugar, that less sweet doesn't mean they have less sugar. We shouldn't confuse less sweet with less sugar. There is a way where one can undertake a bake and achieve a less tasting cake which is not overwhelming without reducing the sugar. You just have to substitute certain sugars for the outcome you need. So, for instance, if I wanted a good cake, vanilla cake, and I didn't want the sugar to be so sweet, perhaps the amount of sugar I will pick, I would measure. If I don't want to swap parts of the sugar for, say, brown or light brown sugar, which will affect taste, I have to focus on balancing the sugar content with a level or an amount of moisture that will make the cake less sweet but doesn't compromise on the quantity of sugar. But then again, the outcome of that bake is likely to be different to a regular cake that is just optimized for, say, a regular bake. So, for instance, if I focused on reducing the sweetness by maintaining the same quantity of sugar but increasing moisture, sometimes you can have a more dense bake. So I say all of that to say my understanding of baking came from a place of wanting to meet my own needs. And as time went on, it became almost an obsession where it was like I was fascinated by adding sugar and all of these things together, which by themselves meant nothing, but put together were equally amazing. So the result drove me to kind of experiment more and more and more and more. And as that happened, there's only so many cupcakes you can bake or test or develop and eat. So naturally, I would give cupcakes to friends. I'll find any reason to make cupcakes for friends and family. And that intention of just trying to dispose of my cupcakes would lead to a word of mouth, because then people were like, oh, this cake tastes different, it's lovely. And then I would have people want to buy some cakes off me. Well, cake is one thing, but for you to have a great tasting cake by itself, you perhaps want to consider buttercream. Same as the development of my cake recipes, my buttercream recipes came very earlier on to me that I wanted to master Swiss meringue buttercream, because that was also in tandem with my need to reduce the amount of sugar that I needed in a cake. So I found a recipe, adapted and adapted until I got myself a Swiss meringue butter cream recipe. So my very first experiences with cakes came from making cupcakes and also Swiss meringue buttercream. So even now, when I have found beginners who think Swiss meringue buttercream is so technical to make, yes, it's technical, but it's not that hard to make. It actually just involves following a few processes diligently and not compromising on them. And if you do, like wiping your bowls to make sure there is no trace of grease in there, making sure that your meringue is whipped properly, ensure right. Before we continue our story, let's go and check on our cake, okay? Okay. I think we are going to need a bit more time for the bake to be done, but I have a bit of time to wait around for it to be done. So whilst we're at it, so now I had a recipe for cupcakes, I had a recipe for buttercream, and by just sharing my cakes and buttercream on the cupcakes, the people who had access to it felt like they were having a different experience of cakes, because just like me, most of them were only used to a certain level of bakery style cakes. because those were the ones they had available. But even with the bakery style cake, there are different sort of niches who specialize in different things. But as a bakery, depending on who you're serving, there's not a lot of choice. You can't go to a generalized bakery that offers certain products and ask that you want your cake to be filled with, say, Swiss meringue buttercream, right? Because the bakery has to observe their practices and selections for a specific audience. So those who had a first taste of some of my cakes had felt like they were having a completely different experience because it suited their preferences, and they also felt like, just like me, they had been forced to eat cakes that they probably, if they knew different, would have chosen different, right? So because of that, they were quick to seek me out and ask for say, cakes. So I would make these cupcakes, and I would find an opportunity to give cupcakes to people, which is why I say in recent times there is sort of a certain level of attitude and misinformation and entitlement about what it means to develop one's self in a field and to gain competence and confidence in that field, right? Most people these days would say, oh, don't do things for free and make sure you get something back. And it's so self centered. Well, I think the difference here is that whilst my goals were self centered, they were centered on the fact that I wanted people to try the cakes just so that I can get the feedback I needed to improve. So I wasn't exactly trying to go out of my way to give cakes to the world, but I was also aware that I had to give something out for free to get back what I needed. And I wasn't skimming of that intention. So yes, I lost money doing that, but has that served me? Yes, it has served me, because without all those experiences, without all those people giving me feedback, some of which were most of which were generally great, but the odd time I probably had a certain feedback, I had to objectively sit with it and compare it to what I had received in previous times and see where that feedback fitted, especially if it wasn't what I was expecting. But all of that would lead me to 2019, where I then decided to take the leap completely and do this as a business. This is in 2019 when I had set up in the UK. For you to be able to set a bakery business from home, it requires some processes. Much of it is centered on things you have to do legally, which is that you have to contact an outfit, which is the local council. The local council has a professional individual called the HO. It's called an environmental health officer. This person is a representative of the outfit who would come and perform a sort of assessment. There is a guideline for the assessment. The assessment has to show your competence and awareness of food safety practices and how you observe them. So if you are keen or on food and have a true understanding on how you execute from start to finish, practically, but also observing food safety guidelines, it shouldn't be a hard task to accomplish. But then again, it's a requirement that requires somebody observing you critically and giving you marks on it, after which you are given a rating. A 5-star rating is the most. And generally, cakes are noted to be low risk. Not that it's not important enough, but there are other food elements that carry higher risks, but cakes are lesser on that fact. In fact, as cake are noted to be low risk, the most important thing to focus on as a cake business is the knowledge of allergens, right? Because people's lives depend on that. So by 2019, I thought I'll take the leap of faith and set myself up as a business. And I undertook the process. I got my rating, registered my business. Depending on what income you are making, which at the start of your business, you probably won't be making an income, you'll be required to register and pay taxes and all of that stuff. If you want to know more about the process itself, the process has, I guess, evolved over time. And the last time I checked, my registration was 2 years ago, but things change very quickly. So if you would like to know more about the process, hopefully I will link some resources to present ones. By 2019, I decided to take the leap of faith and become like a registered business with a food rating, which was fun to do, but boy, that is where things got slightly murky. I guess the part where I was transitioning also required a lot of commitment and work, because I was undertaking the baking for people asking for bakes, and then still having a full-time job. So there are aspects of that entire process I've skipped, because look, we can talk about this journey a whole day and we still won't be done. Okay, we're going to take a break from our story and we're going to check the cake and see, so that we don't burn the cake. Okay. Remember, the cake went in at is it 12:57 ish, and we said, okay, the bake time is between an hour and an hour 15 minutes. Don't forget, this was a deep bake. Yep, it's come out clean, 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 and it's exactly 12 minutes past 2. So true to our time, it's been baking for an hour 15 minutes, because if it went in at 12:57, it is 12 past 2 now. Exactly an hour 15 minutes and our cake is baked. With that said, then I'm going to put in the red velvet cake. Now that has gone in at 170 degrees C at almost a quarter past 3, quarter past 2. So we should be back in an hour to check it, but I doubt we'll be here for the full hour. Just ignore me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this on the side for about 10 minutes and then we're going to flip it out. But whilst we're at it, let's catch up on our story. So the part where I transitioned from just hobby baking to a business still required a lot of work. I had made so many cakes. If you want to know about the story of my first cake and how that went, I'll tell you another day. If I put that part in this story, we're not going to be finished. So by 2019, when I registered the business and wanted to take things up, I had no clue what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing, to be honest. Okay? All I know is that I wanted to make a cake. And I was obsessed with making a great tasting cake with great crumb, which I still do. The rest of it just happened. Okay? Except when I say it just happened, I meant I had the sense to try something new. I didn't know what that would look like. I didn't know what the experience would be like. So, and I didn't have anyone around me who did what I did. Most of the people closest to me have regular jobs. They're not bakers, and they don't look, they're not people who are doing what I'm doing, where they can say, I've tried this before, try this. But one thing I can say about all those people, they were and still are so supportive of my dream. The story of people online saying, oh, I have felt the most let down by families and friends. Yeah, there's the odd hater friend or something. That is to be expected. Most people will probably not follow your dream like you would, but it's not personal. It's like people have their own lives and things to worry about. So if you are passionate about something, get up and go do it. Okay? You will fall a few times. And if you're sitting down waiting for a perfect moment, I'm here to tell you, it will happen. It won't. You will have to learn from the experience. Unless you're having a family bakery business handed down to you, or somebody close to you, or a mentor who is guiding you. Even so, the experience is so unique that you're going to have a completely different experience from them. Except what their presence and knowledge will do is that it will safeguard you and give you a template to start with. But if you don't have a template, what do? You just get in dirty and keep going until you learn from it. So what did I do? I registered my baking business, and I thought the first thing I wanted was a market stall. Really? A market stall. Why? I don't know. I just imagined that if I had a market stall, people will buy my cakes, people will know me, and then I will have a name in the community, and then I'll have an established business. I guess that may be connected to my marketing plan, which wasn't well thought of. Because now I realize, as a custom cake maker, the market stall is the last place you want to be, because market stall is going to have like transit customers, people who are just passing by, who don't know you, who don't have an interest in what you do. They just pass by and then they figure that you are there, and if your presentation is appealing enough, they will stop and buy. But after that, they're moving on, you know. And the market was an open market that came with its own challenges, because when the rains came, there was no market, but I would have baked all the cakes already. And added to my lack of a very good marketing plan, I didn't anticipate some of these challenges that came along the way. So needless to say, that was a lot of losses. Whew, thinking about it now just makes me. Let's turn this cake over. Thank you, Jackie. Jackie thinks sharing my story is very insightful and helpful for anyone who is in a state of indecision. So, Jackie, I hope that story is of some use to you. But yes, our cake baked, and as you can see, it's a solid cake over here. It's baked right well. And I'm going to leave it on the countertop, because actually this cake is going to be carved into a 6-inch hard cake. So I'm going to level this when it chills to 3 layers, and then use the template to carve it into a 6-inch heart shaped cake, and then I will pipe on it. So perhaps what I will do is leave this to the side. My goal is not to wait for another hour for the red velvet cake to be done. I have that red velvet cake over here on the channel page, so you can check it out. I have tried it countless times. So it's a pleasure that I can come and bake the red velvet. But the intention about baking the cakes today is to give you some additional information where necessary, and also to utilize the time to inform you about my baking journey and how my journey has progressed and evolved, so that if you're in a state of indecision and you're not sure, you can learn something from it, and you can take that with you and use that to inform yourself, so it can help you in your decision making. Because I feel like when I started baking, if I had had somebody whose experience I could relate to, then maybe I would have had a different experience altogether. Because some of the things that influenced my decision is, I'll put it out here first of all, I'm an immigrant, okay? I've lived in the UK for 17 years. But being an immigrant means that your goals and expectation about what you want for yourself is completely hinged on the family's expectation and objectives financially that you want to achieve, so you can support your own people. Now, if you're an immigrant or you're an African, you know what I'm saying over here. You don't wake up one day and give up a job Okay, most people who give up a job, it's never an easy decision. Okay, I don't suppose even the person who had a job handed to them and had a clear plan of their transition to other things still found it so easy a decision to make. I don't suppose that at all. However, it's a completely different kettle of fish or different set of rules if other people's lives completely hangs on you, right? And you have to observe that. So for instance, a father who has a child, so it's not just connected to and our expectations and what is required of us as immigrants. It's connected to significant circumstances where you have things to achieve and other things relies on your achievement. Like if a father has a newborn, it's going to be hard for them to leave their job that probably is the source of income that pays for their household and their family when they have like a wife postpartum at home. Do you see what I mean? So people leaving a job is not as easy as it's made to seem. Okay. And if you have a fear of transitioning from your job, believe me, that fear is valid. If you're on social media, the irony being I'm talking on a platform that is a social media platform, Mary Edu, to say Mary, right? I am talking on a social media platform and I'm like, if you don't, but then these entrepreneurs over there will have you believe, stop letting fear stop you. My dear, there is nothing fearful about knowing that you have a child at home that looks up to the income that supports them, that you have a partner at home who waits on your income from a steady, secure job, okay, to live off. It's just not a decision you can take on a whim and go, okay, I found my dream, I'm gonna go and live my life, sis. You'll find out very quickly that dream was no dream, but it was just a dream. You need to wake up. Okay, now I'm getting really passionate. Mary, is it? Yeah, Mary. Hi, I am getting passionate about this because half of the time, like people, I standing here, I started this scared. Okay? Scared. So scared, in fact, that embracing this journey hasn't come easy. In fact, I have a video on this channel where I discuss the feelings I still have about feeling like a failure. Not because I really genuinely believe I failed. In fact, I love my life and I am grateful for the opportunity that I have here. Okay. The opportunity that I eventually got to embrace the choice to do something that I love. But it's not just love. Love doesn't pay the bill, honey. Okay. I don't just love cakes and then I make cakes and then it pays my bill. Okay. No. I love cakes because I love cakes. It doesn't pay the bill, okay? Just putting my business out there. It doesn't. But here's what loving what you do does. When you don't have a boss on your neck, you don't have the threat of being fired. Can you hear me? If you can hear what I'm saying, just leave me a wave in the chat, right? There is something about knowing that you have a certain level of commitment that comes with consequences if those commitments are not observed. There is something about that. Can we unpack that? You know, you don't just love your job because it gives you money to pay your bill. You may love your job to that extent. But when you have an annoying boss or an annoying work colleague, or the culture of your job is so it kills your spirit every day, but you know you have to wake up and go to work, because you know what, if you don't go to work, you don't get paid. And even when you get paid, there is only so much time you can wake up and decide not to go to work before you get called into the office for an appraisal. And the appraisal may lead to a verbal warning, and then you get a written warning, and then the chances are you get sacked. Okay, so sometimes for the fear of these consequences, you just toe the line and observe those things. I give that example to say where you are abiding to a set of rules that has associated consequences, the way you play that game is completely different. But when you wake up in your house, like I do in my kitchen, and I don't have the threat of a boss trying to fire me, yes, that sounds like a luxury until you find out that, well, the threat of a boss firing me is a good thing because that will get me to get my ish together. But if I don't have the threat of a boss and I'm not disciplined, I think I'm Christian. the the verse that just dropped in my spirit is a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the arms, and poverty. So if you don't have the threat of a boss coming at you, if you don't have the fear of not gaining an income, then chances are, if you don't love your job, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the arms. You have all this freedom. You can do what you want, yes, until you realize the month is over and 1 month passes and 2 months passes. And then you realize, oh, shoot, I had all this freedom, but it has come at the expense of an income because you can't afford you, right? And I don't say this on a mountain top. I say this because I've experienced it. You know, when I had burnout and I thought I hated selling cakes. I hate it. My people, this can be a conversation for a lifetime. I say that to say the fear of transition is real, it's valid, but don't let it stop you. Be well informed, but take your chances. So don't go quitting your job on one Friday because you saw the clouds. Have a plan. Now, sometimes the plan will not work out when you are in the experience, but it's okay as long as you're doing it. If you have a day job and you want to bake on the side, you will find out quickly how tiring that is. Because if you want to remain committed to your day job, you will have little time to enjoy your dream over here baking on the side. But that is where commitment comes in. That is where discipline comes in. That is where focus comes in. You know, my mornings generally start from, let's say, 7:30 in the morning, and I don't go to bed till 3:30. And unless I'm having the customers, the clients paying for the cakes, which in itself is not much, to be honest. The orders are not like, I don't run a bakery where you have 10 cakes. If I made 10 cakes a week, I'll be dead. I am not of that capacity. It's not like I'm not competent. I'm just saying that to make 10 cakes, the workflow, the pathways, you can't keep churning cakes out like that. You will at some point have to develop systems to help you execute that. And I'm not there yet. So I have to manage my own well-being, to manage my own ability and responsibility towards the client, to be able to manage the quality of cakes. I have to choose less cakes to be able to produce a good quality cake. But how much does a cake cost, and how many can you get for it to afford an entire lifestyle? Anybody out there who haven't told you their exact business plan and discuss this and you're seeing results, they're selling you dreams, honey. Okay? So the point is, eventually, if you transition to becoming a cake business, you have to align the intention to what it looks like to having a full-time job. Because for me, what I never want to do is make cake a job. It's important to me I maintain the peace and soothing element that led me to starting cakes. Okay? As a result of that, the compromise is that cake doesn't afford my lifestyle. Look, this morning, I'll give you some real life insight here. This morning, I'll give you some real life insight and I'll leave it as that because I am getting animated and this is okay. This morning, right? YouTube, I would show you this on the screen, but it has information, private information that I can't block out in there because this is a live. But believe me when I say this morning, YouTube updates creators every week and monthly over their monthly updates. This month alone, as in the month of June, so it says here's what you got up to in June. In June, I uploaded 3 long form content, as in 3 videos in June, and this is counting 28 days in June. So 3 videos, 26 shorts videos. So in the 30 days in June, I only I missed 4 days. And in the 4 days, I tell you what I was doing. I was busy baking them 200 cupcakes that I have spoken about. There's a whole short series I created last week about it. It was hot. I had 200 cupcakes to bake at short notice. It required too much out of me. And I create my shorts daily. You know, some days I schedule them up to like 7 days in advance, but generally I don't have the capacity to be able to do that. I have to manage my own energy levels. So I had 26 daily shorts. I had 13 live videos. The live videos are at least an hour per time. So there's been 13 hours of my time standing here talking to you about cakes. And there are 17 posts, as in 17 posts in the community page. So in my community page, there's 17 posts. There is 13 live streams. There is 26 shorts. And there are 3 videos. If you put that all together, what are we looking at? We are looking at over 45 single content that is created in different formats. How much did I get paid for that? Nothing. Okay, here it is, nothing. Why? Because even though I hit the monetization for 500 subscribers, I haven't made it to, I don't have a viral video that's gone so viral that I have monetized quickly. So I haven't been monetized into the partner program where I'm getting ad revenue yet. So everything I have just told you here, over 40 plus content on the YouTube channel, not a dime. But I still come here and I'm excited to talk to you. Why do you think that is? Because I love what I do. If YouTube never paid me, I'll still be here. But it also means that the control I have to be able to show up and create all this content may be limited if I had to wake up and go to a full-time job. Because you know what? It's exactly 2:34 in the UK. And if I had a full-time job, I'll be at work now. My job used to start as early as 7 a.m. and never finish till 10 p.m. So what time would I have had to make a cake? So I say that to say I am privileged, even though YouTube doesn't pay me. I am privileged to have something that I am so incredibly passionate about. I am privileged in the fact that I was able to face my fear. And even when that came at a cost to me, I am privileged in knowing that not everyone would get to this point. I use the example of a father who has a newborn, because at some point I had a newborn and my world changed, and the fear of not being able to afford, say, formula for my child or not buy their basics kind of got me in a job that I didn't care about, but I had to go to work. I'll leave that as that today. Maybe we'll pick up on the story later on another chat, on another live, where I will tell you some of the challenges of what it looked like when I started a business.